What's going on, everyone, man? I hope you guys had so much fun yesterday. If you don't know, I dropped that Grammy award-winning single, iCloud. I would really highly appreciate if you guys could check it out. Hopefully I can win an Oscar from that. Literally, I'm already getting like doctors DMing me telling me that they like saved diseases straight from that song. So let me know what you guys think about it. Also, let me know how the audio quality is from this video. I'm kind of trying a different, it's the same mic, but I'm trying a different setup. So let me know if it's better, worse, don't even notice a difference. Let me know in the comment section below. But you guys have been so good recently to me, and the least I can repay you is discussing a phone that not only is pretty extremely old, but also is a phone that I extremely love. And there's not a lot of phones out there that are like that. It's either one or the other. This phone kind of checks off all those boxes. And in my opinion, this is a phone that, yes, on paper it is kind of old. It's a pretty old phone, I'm not going to lie. But specs and real world usage, when combined with how this phone feels in the hand, I'm going to tell you, this phone definitely has a special place in my heart. And that phone is the OnePlus One. I don't even know why I said it like that, because you guys already know what phone it is. I don't know why I'm trying to like act like it's some like type of surprise or something. But the OnePlus One came out in 2014. It actually came out in April, so it was announced in April, but it came out in June. So this phone, as of, I'll probably say it because I'm recording this April 1st, April 2nd, whenever this video is coming out. This phone is 5 years old, okay? And this is pretty crazy because there's not a lot of 5-year-old phones out there that are still pretty decent, okay? Now, I'm not going to lie and say this phone is amazing and it's like the best phone ever. It's not like that at all. But what I'm trying to say is that this is a pretty good balance of price and what you're getting from a phone. So looking around the body, I'll definitely say that it has an interesting design because on the front, it had a lot of bezel on it, I'm not going to lie. It had more bezel on it than the 6S and 6 Plus, which was surprising because this phone came out around that era. And this is no doubt an extremely thick phone, and thick with two C's. In terms of the bezels on the front, we had a 5.5-inch 1080p IPS panel, so it wasn't a horrible panel at all. It was pretty decent. The pixels per inch were at 401, so it wasn't a crazy amazing display. I will say at the time, it wasn't that bad of a display at all, especially when the biggest selling point of this phone was that it was pretty much a budget flagship in a way. They try to put as much they can in a phone while still maintaining that low price, and OnePlus stuck to their roots and they still managed to do that even when we have phones like Google early on with their Nexus line. They cut the cost down a little bit, they cut the pieces, how the phone felt, all that stuff. So they started off being a budget flagship, then they ended up being an actual flagship, and in some cases offering less for more. So that's kind of my opinion right there. We obviously have a front camera on it. On the back, there was kind of an interesting texture. So we had a 13 megapixel camera, single sensor. I'll get into that in a minute. But the back, I don't even understand. It was like sandstone kind of design. There were two different variants of it, a regular variant and then the sandstone version. There were 16 and 64 gig versions for this too, and I like the sandstone version a lot, but in my opinion, it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way because I felt like if I got it a little bit wet, it would just kind of like feel a little weird. Like it literally felt like sandpaper almost, and you know when you get sandpaper wet, it's never a good mix. I felt like if I got this phone wet, it would like start peeling off. I know that's kind of a stupid thing, and I don't think a lot of people are going to be affected by that anymore, but that's kind of one thing I had to kind of keep in mind when I was looking at this phone. Now that kind of covers up basically the whole entire outside of this device. But one interesting thing about this phone wasn't necessarily the hardware or the price, which both those things were pretty cool. It was actually the software. So this thing was released with CyanogenMod, and this phone was a CyanogenMod phone when it was released. And if you guys don't believe me, look at the back on the very bottom. It says CyanogenMod on it. And so CyanogenMod and OnePlus had a kind of a collaboration thing going on where CyanogenMod was making the software for their phones and OnePlus, I guess, was making the hardware. Now, they did split ways, and since then, CyanogenMod has become a Lineage OS. I don't understand why they split, and I honestly don't even understand why CyanogenMod became Lineage OS. I liked the name CyanogenMod a lot, but that's besides the point. I loved custom ROMing and all that stuff, and I still do every once in a while. So in terms of software, this thing is pretty outdated. It started off with technically Android 4.4.2, but technically the CyanogenMod version of it. You were able to upgrade it to Android 6.0.1 Marshmallow through OnePlus's own software called Oxygen OS. I love Oxygen OS so much. I think Oxygen OS is better than stock Android because they put so many more features on it. That's my opinion. You guys can say whatever you want to. So altogether, if you were to keep this phone stock, it's pretty limited in terms of the amount of software features you have in it. But one cool thing about this phone is that, like I said, it was a CyanogenMod phone. This thing does have a root out for it. You are able to custom ROM it, and I think that's kind of the nature of this phone specifically, and I think that's why a lot of people bought it, because it was a CyanogenMod phone that took away the need of people having to root it and ROM it. It was already pretty much ROMmed in the get-go. They just pretty much had to root it. As of right now, there's actually still quite a bit of a development community behind it. There's even Lineage OS ROMs out for it, so it's kind of funny because Lineage OS and CyanogenMod and OnePlus split ways, but then somehow they actually put it back on there. Now it's not official, it's unofficial, but still it's better than nothing, and there's tons of different Android Pie ROMs out for it. There's tons of different ROMs for this thing. I would recommend going to XDA and looking at all those ROMs. If you currently own a OnePlus, I would highly suggest for you to do it. I mean, yeah, it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be some like problems here and there, but even an Android Oreo ROM is still going to be better than an Android Marshmallow on stock. So that's kind of my opinion, and kind of makes sense if you think about it. So that kind of covers up the software side of things. Let's go ahead and move on to the performance. So I'll tell you the specs and I'll tell you the real world use you guys already know. It had the Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 chipset, a quad-core CPU, an Adreno 330 GPU, and 3 gigs of RAM. And I'll definitely tell you like this. If your usage is pretty basic in terms of, you're going to do some light multitasking, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you probably won't notice the phone being extremely slow. And what I mean by that is, if a modern day company were to release a phone like this right now, I would honestly be like, this is an extremely slow phone. You should not be charging $400 to $500 for this phone. But when you factor in the year this thing was released, the age, also the price tag of this thing, all those things considered, this thing is honestly not that slow a device for being a 5-year-old phone. Whether you're opening apps, closing apps, which closing apps doesn't take that much memory, multitasking, all those different things, it's not going to be that bad on this phone if I'm being honest. And that's kind of an important thing. And I think that is attributed to a lot of it being stock. It doesn't really have too much substance going on through it besides the features that Auction OS provided, as well as the RAM. It had 3 gigs of RAM. Now, there's no fingerprint sensor, there's nothing like that, so you're giving up some things there. But in terms of the performance, I don't even know why I brought up that fingerprint sensor thing. In terms of the performance, I'll definitely tell you it's not horrible if you're not expecting too much from a device. In terms of gaming, that's kind of the same thing too a little bit. If you're like doing extreme heavy gaming, it's probably going to run into some errors. Not errors per se, but more so like glitched frames and slowness of speeds. But again, you should be considering that when buying a 5-year-old device. I don't think you're buying this phone to have like the latest and greatest and expecting to play the best games at the highest graphics. Of course, if you're playing games, they're probably going to downscale the graphics automatically, and it's not going to be, if I were to sum up the performance, it's not horribly horrible. You're going to be probably content. But if you're expecting something that's crazy and it's extremely smooth and everything, you probably will not get it from the OnePlus One. And maybe if you were to flash a custom ROM, and maybe if there's a kernel out for this thing, flash that and increase the speeds that way, maybe that's the case. But I don't know too much about that side of the OnePlus One series, so I would recommend doing some research. But in terms of the performance, it's pretty good for the age, the price, and everything combined. But again, if you're expecting a lot from a phone, this is probably not for you. So that kind of covers up the whole entire performance aspect of it. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the camera section. And I'll definitely tell you like this, I'll just say the specs it has and everything. It has a 13 megapixel camera, dual LED flash, which is pretty interesting. You can shoot 4K videos on it too, which is pretty impressive. You can even do 1080p at up to 60 frames per second. And what I will tell you is, I don't necessarily think that this camera is good in today's standards. I think it's, probably like a 5 out of 10, maybe like a 4.5 out of 10 when all things considered. Maybe it's like a 5 out of 10, I don't know. It's not amazing. You guys can kind of look at the camera's quality that I'm showing now and kind of be the judge of it. There's not a lot of features in it either if you were to keep it stock. Now, I feel like if you were to upgrade it to the Android Pie ROMs out for it, maybe they put new features in it, but it's a pretty basic camera. And if you're expecting, to take amazing photos or anything, I don't necessarily think you should be expecting that, especially if you look on the back camera. It's a pretty small sensor. Now, it is a 13 megapixel sensor, so it's not extremely small in terms of the megapixel count, but the actual photos and everything you're going to take, I don't necessarily think they're going to be that good. The front is a 5 megapixel sensor. You can shoot HD videos on it, 720p, and I'll definitely say overall, the camera quality, both front and the back, is probably like a 5 out of 10. Now, this is one of those phones that just sucks on Snapchat, I have to say it. Every time I open up Snapchat on the OnePlus One, I just feel like I'm having a headache because it just seems like a lot of things are messing up. And I saw the same exact thing with my Nexus 4, the phone that I owned for like 2 years. So many shutdowns, so many random shutdowns on Snapchat. I heard the OnePlus One has the same issue too, and I did experience it. It wasn't necessarily a shutdown of my complete phone, but it was just the Snapchat app shutting down constantly, so kind of one thing to consider there too. So now moving on to my favorite aspect to talk about of a phone, which is the battery life. Now this thing has a 3100 mAh battery size. Okay, now what I will tell you is, when this phone was released, I heard a lot of rumors. I couldn't afford it at the time, even though it was pretty cheap. I heard a lot of things, people saying that the battery life on this phone was very, very good, and I don't have any way to go against that. That was 5 years ago. I certainly believe the people who were telling me that, but the thing with it being 5 years old now, or even just like a couple years older, is that battery size does degrade over time, and so does battery life. So the battery size of 3100 mAh isn't necessarily that size anymore. It's probably more so like 2200 mAh or whatever, depending on how the person took care of their phone, whatever, if you're buying it used. On my specific unit, it wasn't horrible. I'll definitely tell you, it was pretty much middle of the road. If I took my usage on my main phone right now, which is my iPhone 10, and put it on the OnePlus One, I would say I would probably have to charge about 45% through the day. So that means, using it as my alarm clock, using it throughout the day, having all those different things on Bluetooth on all day, I would probably have to charge within at least a little bit before halfway through my cycle of my usual typical day. And that's not a horrible thing, I guess. If you're around a charger, that's fine. I'm around a charger pretty much 90% of the day. For a lot of you, that might be a bad thing, especially the fact that this thing does not have a removable battery. So that is one thing to consider. So I will say, if you're able to find one in pretty decent condition, that probably will mean that the battery life and battery battery size has probably been, maintained. But if you're getting one in some pretty bad condition, it doesn't last all day, you can probably attribute that to the degradation in the battery size. So my specific unit, it wasn't that great, but you might get a lemon and you might have a phone that actually has pretty decent battery life because the battery size is maintained. So that's one thing you always have to consider when buying used technology, which I always like. I buy a lot of used technology, but if you don't know what to look out for, that could be an issue. Now, some other notable things to note: this thing does take micro USB port, not USB Type-C. It had a headphone jack, no fingerprint sensor, no water resistance or anything like that. It was built out of plastic, but it doesn't necessarily feel extremely cheap. It feels like probably like a mid-range budget phone you would expect, which I think is what it was pretty much going for. So, to kind of wrap this thing up, would I recommend the OnePlus One in 2019? What I will tell you is, I don't think the OnePlus One is a horrible phone. I don't think it's a bad phone at all. I think there's a time and place for it. As of right now, I would say if you have even a little bit of money, I'm talking like $100 to $200, I would probably not buy a OnePlus One right now. It would just be kind of pointless. If you were to ask me like a year or two ago, I might have said yes, but this thing is severely outdated in terms of stock software. If you were to go and flash and ROM it, I guess that's a different story, but there's so many better options out there for it that I would probably recommend you to look elsewhere. So if you want, I won't say the OnePlus One is a horrible phone. If you currently own it, I'm not necessarily surprised, but I want to know if you flashed it, if you custom ROM'd it, or if you actually even just kept it stock. I want to know your experience with it. But instead of the OnePlus One, I would recommend you to probably get a Google Pixel XL. I think that one costs less than $200. I would highly suggest for you to get that. That is a much better phone than the OnePlus One. Stock software, able to be custom ROM'd, able to be rooted, amazing cameras, and I think that costs less than $200. I think there's the OnePlus 3T that's less than $200 on Amazon as well, and that is a much better phone than this one. I will go ahead and link a Google Pixel XL as well as a OnePlus 3T or OnePlus 5. I don't remember which one it was, but whichever one I find for less than $200, I'll link that one down in the description as well so you guys can pick it up. I would highly suggest for you guys to pick those up versus the OnePlus One. And again, I always find the cheapest ones on Amazon, link them straight below. A little bit of that revenue that goes through that sale actually comes back to this channel so we can do more giveaways and more reviews and more comparisons and all those different things. So I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also, check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I would really appreciate if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.